Here's the most unsettling idea you will ever hold in your mind. If something brought everything into being, then what brought that something into being? And if the response is that nothing brought it into being, that it simply always was, then why couldn't the cosmos itself have simply always been? You see, the instant you introduce a maker to account for existence, you haven't resolved the enigma. You've merely shifted it one step further back. And that one step, that single rational move, dismantles everything. Remain with me, because this reaches far deeper than you imagine. Let's begin somewhere familiar to you. You're a young child, perhaps 5 or 6, and you're stretched out on a lawn, gazing upward at the evening sky. The stars stretch on forever. The blackness between them feels dense, almost tangible, and your mind, young and unguarded, poses a question that every human soul has posed since the first one gazed upward. Where did all this originate? Your parents might have answered, God fashioned it. Your teacher might have answered, the Big Bang. Your grandmother might have struck a match to a candle and murmured a prayer. But observe something extraordinary. Every single response, regardless of the culture, regardless of the era, regardless of the faith or the science, every response ultimately collides with the identical barrier. But where did that originate? This is not a deception. This is not philosophy being convoluted for its own sake. This is the most sincere question a human intellect can pose. Because causality, the notion that everything has an origin, is the very bedrock of how we comprehend reality. Every time something occurs, something else made it occur. A ball travels because you struck it. Rain descends because clouds gathered. Clouds gathered because water rose as vapor. Water rose as vapor because the sun warmed it. Cause, effect, all the way backward. Now, most people, when they trace that sequence far enough, experience a kind of dizziness. The intellect grasps for firm footing and discovers nothing. And in that instant of free fall, many grasp for the oldest response in human history. There must be an initial cause, something that set it all in motion, something that exists beyond the sequence, something everlasting, almighty, unmade. They name it God. And look, that impulse is profoundly human. It is not foolish. It is not archaic. It springs from the same source that propels every scientist, every thinker, every inquisitive child gazing at the heavens. The need to comprehend. The refusal to accept that the enigma simply hovers there unresolved. But here is where we must slow our pace. Because the resolution people have grasped for this notion of a divine, everlasting, unmade maker, when you press upon it softly, when you pose to it the same questions it was meant to resolve, something very peculiar occurs. It fractures. Here is a question nobody wishes to voice aloud. If God fashioned the cosmos and God has always been unmade, everlasting, requiring no origin, then you have embraced the notion that something intricate, something aware, something possessing will and purpose, and might can exist without an origin. But if you've embraced that, why restrict that same reasoning to God alone? Why not extend that identical logic to the cosmos itself? This is not a rhetorical sleight of hand. This is a sincere, rational requirement. You cannot employ it always was. It needs no origin as a justification for a maker, while simultaneously insisting the cosmos could not have always been and must have had an origin. That's not reasoning. That's exceptional treatment. Accepting a principle for everything, except the one thing you wish to shield from it. And it grows even more fascinating when you pose a second concealed question. What manner of thing is God precisely? Most theological portrayals inform us God is boundless, all-aware, almighty, present in every place, exists beyond time. Now contemplate carefully what those words genuinely signify. To be all-aware means to hold in some manner all information. To be almighty means to be capable of every conceivable action. To exist beyond time means to not be bound by the framework that gives cause and effect their significance. These are not straightforward qualities. These are breathtakingly intricate ones. And here's what physics has shown us quietly and steadily over the past century. Intricacy does not emerge from nothing, or does not precede chaos. Awareness, as far as every fragment of evidence informs us, arises from simpler physical processes. It does not generate them. So when someone declares God has always been, they are requesting you to believe that the most intricate, most ordered, most information-dense entity conceivable simply always was, with no process, no emergence, no origin. And they're requesting you to accept this while labeling it an explanation. That is a concealed question, and it refuses to remain concealed. Now, to be equitable, let's examine the strongest version of the case for a maker, because ideas merit being understood at their finest, not their weakest. The case proceeds as follows, and thinkers call it the cosmological case. Everything that commences to exist has an origin. The cosmos commenced to exist. Therefore, the cosmos has an origin, and that origin, by definition, must be something that did not commence, something everlasting, something beyond space and time. It's tidy, it's rational, and it has persuaded some of the finest intellects in history. The physics underlying it is genuine enough. The cosmos, as far as our finest measurements inform us, did have a commencement, or at least a boundary. Roughly 13.8 billion years ago, space itself was inconceivably compressed and scorching. Time, as we gauge it, may not have existed prior to that instant in any significant sense. The equations of general relativity, when traced backward, approach a singularity, a point where the laws of physics, as we comprehend them, cease producing predictions. So, there is a genuine scientific enigma here. The cosmos does appear to have a starting point. And the question, what triggered that starting point, is not resolved by physics yet. That void is genuine. Now, into that void, theology steps forward and declares, the trigger was God. And on the surface, that sounds nearly sensible. You have an enigma. You have a proposed resolution. Fine. But here is where the surface resolution encounters difficulty. When scientists encounter a void in knowledge, they treat it as a void, an open inquiry, a place to probe further, a signal that we require better instruments and more profound thinking. What they do not do, what they cannot do and remain scientists, is fill the void with an entity that is itself unexplained and then pronounce the enigma resolved. Because filling a mystery with a grander mystery is not an explanation, it is the semblance of one. The cosmos's origin is mysterious. We acknowledge that completely, but exchanging one mystery for an even more intricate one, a conscious, almighty, everlasting entity, and labeling an answer, that is where the reason begins to silently crumble. Here is where the genuine revelation arrives. And it comes not from philosophy, but from mathematics and physics themselves. In 2012, physicist Lawrence Krauss released work building upon decades of quantum cosmology that demonstrated something breathtaking. In quantum mechanics, nothing is not what we suppose it is. The classical notion of nothing, a pure emptiness, an absolute absence of everything, turns out to be physically unstable. Quantum fields, even in their lowest conceivable energy condition, oscillate. They tremble. They produce virtual particles that flicker in and out of being. The vacuum of space is not vacant. It is a churning form of quantum activity. And critically, quantum mechanics informs us that systems do not require a classical cause to shift from one condition to another. At the quantum level, the very notion of cause dissolves at the margins. But here's the more profound revelation, the one that restructures how you perceive the entire discussion. When we speak of God as an explanation, we are importing a very particular assumption that the cosmos follows the logic of everyday causality, that things don't occur without reasons, without agents, without prior conditions. And that assumption functions beautifully at human scales. Billiard balls, tumbling apples, detonating stars. But when we reach the boundaries of the cosmos, the Planck scale, the quantum foam, the initial fractions of the initial second, that logic collapses. Not figuratively, mathematically. The equation ceases producing clean causal sequences. Time itself becomes indeterminate. The word before may lose its significance entirely. So when someone inquires, what triggered the Big Bang? They are smuggling in a causal framework that may simply not function at that scale. They are posing a question that sounds grammatically sound, but may be physically meaningless, like inquiring, what lies north of the North Pole? And this is the revelation. The God hypothesis does not merely fail to resolve the question. It presumes the question is coherent when physics powerfully indicates it may not be. The cosmos may not require a cause, not because of philosophy, but because causality itself may be an emergent property of the cosmos, not a principle that governs its birth. Let's step away from the equations for a moment and envision something together. Envision you are standing at the boundary of all existence, not in space, because space is part of the cosmos, and we are envisioning the boundary of the cosmos itself, not in time, because time, as physicists comprehend it, is a dimension interwoven into the fabric of space-time, and we are standing before that fabric was interwoven. You are, in this thought exercise, at the true boundary, nothing behind you, the cosmos before you, not yet born. Now inquire of yourself, what is here? If you declare God, then God is here, this everlasting, conscious, almighty entity existing in a timeless void. But instantly, your intellect collides with a wall. If there is no time, there is no sequence of events. If there is no sequence of events, there is no decision-making. If there is no decision-making, there is no intention. If there is no intention, there is no act of making. A timeless entity cannot resolve to do something, because resolving is a process. It has a before and an after. It demands time. So, either God exists in time, in which instance, where did that time originate? Or God exists beyond time, in which instance, God cannot act, cannot will, cannot make. You perceive the dilemma. Now, attempt the alternative. Envision standing at that boundary and discovering not a conscious entity, but something more akin to a quantum field, something without personhood, without intention, without a blueprint, something that simply is in a condition of pure potential. And from that potential, as quantum mechanics permits, a fluctuation occurs, not triggered, not intended, not designed, merely possible, and therefore eventually inevitable. The cosmos does not require permission to commence. It does not require a maker to sanction its existence. In a cosmos governed by quantum probability, if something can occur if the laws of physics allow it, then across sufficient possibility space, it will occur. No mind required, no intention required, no initial cause required in the theological sense. And here is the most dizzying portion of this thought exercise. You are composed of particles that arose from that fluctuation. Your consciousness, your capacity to pose this question at this very moment, is the cosmos becoming aware of itself, not through design, through physics, that is either the most magnificent accident in existence, or it is something we do not yet possess language for. But observe, it demands no author. Let's venture more profoundly now. Let's genuinely examine what physics declares about the layers of reality, from the tiniest scales to the grandest, and see what we discover when we search for a maker's fingerprint. At the subatomic level, particles do not conduct themselves like tiny billiard balls obeying tidy rules. An electron does not possess a definite location until you measure it. It exists in a superposition of conditions, a smear of probability across space. This is not a limitation of our instruments. This is the genuine nature of the electron. The cosmos, at its most foundational level, is probabilistic, not deterministic. This matters enormously, because if the cosmos at its roots is probabilistic, if events occur without strict prior causes, then the entire rational architecture of the God case wobbles at its base. The case declares everything that commences to exist has an origin, but quantum mechanics declares some things commence to exist without an origin in the classical sense. The case was constructed for a Newtonian cosmos. We no longer inhabit one. Descend one layer more profoundly, and you reach quantum field theory, the most precisely validated scientific theory in human history. In this framework, particles are not foundational objects. They are excitations of underlying fields. The electron is a ripple in the electron field. The photon is a ripple in the electromagnetic field. These fields permeate all of space. They are not composed of anything smaller. They simply are. And these fields in their ground condition, their lowest conceivable energy, still oscillate. They are never genuinely at rest. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle forbids perfect stillness. Energy and time are linked in such a manner that a perfectly silent vacuum is forbidden by mathematics. Now ascend to the grandest scale. The observable cosmos contains roughly 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. The numbers are so vast They cease being imaginable and become purely mathematical. And every single atom and every single star and every single galaxy is governed by the identical quantum fields, the identical physical constants, the identical mathematical laws. Here is what is remarkable. Those laws are identical everywhere. The speed of light, the charge of an electron, the gravitational constant. These values do not shift from one corner of the cosmos to another. They are perfectly consistent across 93 billion light years. Why? We do not fully comprehend. But here is what we do comprehend. That consistency does not indicate a personal, relational, prayer-answering God. It indicates something far more abstract, more like mathematics itself, possessing a kind of existence. And mathematics does not possess intentions. Now let's adopt the broadest conceivable perspective. Let's zoom entirely outward, and then entirely inward, and see what the cosmos resembles from the extremes. Begin at the grandest scale we can envision. Cosmologists now possess strong theoretical grounds to believe our cosmos may be merely one of an enormous, possibly infinite number of cosmoses. The multiverse is not science fiction. It arises naturally from several independent branches of physics, inflationary cosmology, string theory's landscape, and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics all indicate separately toward the same disquieting possibility. If the multiverse is genuine, then the question, why does this cosmos possess the constant it possesses, has a vastly different answer than God calibrated them. The answer becomes, because in an infinite array of cosmoses, every conceivable combination of constants exists somewhere. We discover ourselves in this one, because this one permits the existence of beings capable of posing the question. This is termed the anthropic principle, and it is not a circular argument. It is an observational filter. You cannot observe a cosmos that doesn't permit your existence. So, naturally, any cosmos that contains observers will appear calibrated to permit observers. No calibrator needed. Now, zoom entirely inward. Go smaller than atoms, smaller than protons, down to the level where space itself becomes granular, the Planck scale, 10 to the power of negative 35 meters. At this scale, the concept of space and time themselves may not exist in any continuous sense. Some theories of quantum gravity propose that space and time are emergent, that they arise from something more foundational. The way temperature arises from the average motion of particles. If space and time are emergent, then inquiring what occurred before the cosmos is like inquiring what lies south of the South Pole. The question isn't unanswerable, it's malformed. It presumes a structure that doesn't exist at that level. And here, sandwiched between the cosmic enormity of the multiverse and the quantum graininess of space-time itself, is where the God hypothesis exhausted space. There is no place remaining to stand, no void remaining to fill. Every void that once sheltered the notion of divine intervention has either been filled by physics or reframed as a question that may not demand an answer in the conventional sense. The cosmos does not resemble something that was made. It resembles something that is profoundly mathematically, inevitably, and that is far stranger and far more magnificent than anything a creation narrative has ever presented. So, here's a grand insight, the one that crystallizes everything. The concept of God, specifically the God of traditional theology, the personal maker, the intelligent architect, the entity that exists beyond time and space and wills the cosmos into being, is not merely unsupported by evidence. It is, in a very precise sense, rationally self-undermining. Here's why. Any explanation deserving the name must be simpler than the thing it explains. That is what explanation signifies. When Newton explained the motion of planets with a single equation, he replaced complicated observations with a simple underlying law. When Darwin explained the diversity of life with natural selection, he replaced the presumption of an architect with a simpler process. Strong explanations reduce intricacy, but introducing God amplifies intricacy enormously. You begin with an enigma, the existence of the cosmos. You introduce an explanation, an everlasting, all-aware, almighty conscious entity. But now you possess a fresh enigma that is orders of magnitude more intricate than the first. Where did this entity's consciousness originate? How does it process infinite information? How does it act without time? How does it exist without space? You have not resolved the problem of existence. You have doubled it and then concealed the second problem behind the word everlasting. The philosopher David Hume observed this centuries ago. The physicist Victor Stenger devoted a career formalizing it. The biologist Richard Dawkins termed it the central argument. Any maker capable of architecting the cosmos would have to be at least as intricate as the cosmos itself, and therefore demands just as much explanation. An unexplained explainer is not an explanation, and this is not a hostile observation. It is not an assault on faith or on the profoundly human need to discover meaning. It is simply the requirement that we apply our reasoning consistently, that we hold every proposed explanation, including the most ancient and comforting ones, to the identical standard. The cosmos is astonishing. Its existence is mysterious. Its laws are breathtaking in their grace. But the fitting response to a mystery is not to conjure a grander mystery and label it resolved. The fitting response is wonder and effort. But let's rest with something for a moment before we reach the conclusion, because this conversation is not merely about logic. It is about what it signifies to be a conscious creature in an enormous, indifferent, mathematically governed cosmos. There is a certain variety of solitude in the cosmos that physics portrays. A cosmos with no author, no blueprint, no cosmic purpose inscribed into its equations. A cosmos where you are a temporary arrangement of atoms that will one day scatter back into the void from which they came. That is a difficult thing to hold. And perhaps that is precisely why the God hypothesis has endured across every culture in every century. Not because it is rationally sound, but because it is emotionally essential. It makes the solitude bearable. It grants the suffering meaning. It offers the terrifying impermanence of life a frame, a narrative within which it makes sense. These are not trivial things. These are the things that hold civilizations together. But here is what philosophy has silently murmured for centuries and what science now proclaims. You can possess the wonder without the fabrication. You can possess the awe without the author. You can stand beneath the evening sky and feel the full gravity of existence, not diminished because it is purposeless, but intensified because it is genuine. A sunset is not less gorgeous because it is explained by the scattering of light. A human life is not less significant because it was not designed. Love is not less genuine because it arose from neurons rather than divine decree. The cosmos does not need to be made to be extraordinary. It merely needs to be, and when you genuinely absorb that, when you permit the reality of it to settle fully into your marrow, you recognize something remarkable. The cosmos, in producing you, produced something capable of comprehending it. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. That is not a minor miracle. Even if no miracles exist, here is where I wish to leave you. Every atom in your body was forged inside a star. The carbon in your cells, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones. Every single one of these atoms was cooked in stellar fusion over billions of years and dispersed across space when those stars detonated. You are, in the most literal sense, composed of dead stars. And those stars were composed of hydrogen. And that hydrogen was made in the initial 3 minutes after the commencement of the cosmos, when the energy density was so immense that protons fused spontaneously in the expanding fireball. And that fireball arose from what? A quantum fluctuation, a probabilistic event at the boundary of time, something without intention, without consciousness, without design. And from that nothing that was not quite nothing, through 13.8 billion years of physics, came hydrogen, then stars, then heavier elements, then planets, then chemistry, then life, then neurons, then language, then the question you are posing at this very moment. Where did all of this originate? The cosmos made you, and then, through you, it inquired about itself. You are not separate from the cosmos, observing it from outside. You are the cosmos folded back upon itself, attaining self-awareness for a brief, impossible moment. The universe gazing at its own reflection in the mirror of a human mind. There is no God in the equations, no signature in the constants, no author in the margins, but there is something vast and elaborate and almost incomprehensibly gorgeous, a mathematical structure of such depth and grace that entire human lifetimes are insufficient to explore its edges. Call it what you wish, but do not diminish it by rendering it simple. Do not substitute the genuine, dizzying, magnificent mystery of existence with a word. Rest with the mystery. It is the most sincere thing you can do.